Okay, let's get the work session agenda started. The time is 4:17 p.m. We have one item on the agenda today, which is site-based budget update. Superintendent Gall, I'll turn it over first to you to provide us some context, and then Dr. Brandon Comfort.
Yeah, I'm super excited to bring to the board where we are. This has been a multi-year journey. In 2022, we committed to the idea of giving our buildings both more authority and more accountability to how the budget works. Centralized controls of dollars is a viable strategy when you're a system that is reeling or rearing from opportunity, but we believe that we have turned that corner and are in a place now where we want to give that authority and autonomy down to the building level, and with that comes great accountability. Site-based or school-based or student-based budgeting is not a new phenomenon. It is new for us, but we have been partnered with Allaview, who is now part of the larger Power School suite of services, to do this not just in theory but also in practice. They lead it from a budget-based conversation of how we actually do the accounting and the books for that to happen. Dr. Comfort and his team have been through about half the schools, maybe a little.
We're almost done now.
Almost done.
Yeah.
And I'll say that overall, the feedback has been very positive from site leaders for their opportunity to have budget authority. And with that, we've asked Brandon to come and kind of give you a day in the life of what that briefing looks like as we give to school leaders. Brandon?
Good evening, board. Super excited about the opportunity to share. I will be transparent. The transition to site-based budgeting was something I was very excited about, also something I was very anxious about. Changing the way we build our budget and how we fund our schools is not an easy thing to transition. And so I come with lots of gratitude and positivity for how it's going so far. I would encourage the board, if you haven't, to reach out to the schools that you visit and talk to leaders about how that budget build has gone. Because I felt like it's been great. I'm really excited and excited for how it will continue. So setting the stage a little bit, I want to be clear a little bit with some of the language here. So student-based budgeting, site-based budgeting, school-based budgeting. The truest form of student-based budgeting is really money follows kids. And I will say that we're in the middle of that right now. We are really turning over more, to Superintendent Gall's point, more authority and accountability to schools, but we are not yet at a place where we're saying this exact dollar amount is following this exact kid type to this exact school. We're going to get there over time. We will have a fall adjustment process this year that will get us closer to that. Right now, what we're largely doing is, again, turning over more say, because that's what schools want. That's what I wanted as a principal. I wanted to have more authority for how I was resourced. And then if it was successful, I wanted myself and my staff to own that praise. And if it wasn't successful, I wanted us to own that accountability. And so Melissa's going to bring up a few documents tonight, and then I'm actually going to get you in the Allaview tool and just kind of show you what schools are seeing, and then absolutely we'll open up to questions. So the first document Melissa's pulling up is an example of a current staffing allocation. So this is how District 11 has presented staffing allocations for a number of years. And so I want to highlight a few things. In this model, we tell schools what they're getting. We tell them the number of teachers they're getting. We tell them the number of assistant principals that they're getting. We tell them the number of office staff that they're getting and essentials teachers. We tell them all of those things. And we do that based on a formula, the board-approved formula. Now, it doesn't differentiate largely by need of school. It is if you have X number of kids, you get X number of staff, right? And so obviously we are transitioning significantly away from that. What I also want to draw your attention to, I don't know, Melissa, can you zoom in on that top part of it? Okay. This is, I removed the name, but this is an actual staffing allocation for one of our schools. And so it highlights on the top something that I think the board will appreciate in terms of how we're moving forward. So as we presented this year's staffing, on the top we said, here's the allocation you would get for teachers if we went back and purely followed the board formula. So as an example with this school, they would have gotten 50.3 teacher FTE. And then right next to that is the actual FTE that we gave them. Okay, so for this specific school, they have 4.7 additional FTE beyond board formula this year. Every single school in this district has more FTE than what board formula requires. Some more than 4.7, some less than 4.7, but every single school has more than board formula. And that's a really clear indicator for how we move forward. As we thought about, Melissa, if you can go to the second document, as we thought about how do we start to allocate schools' budget and resource, where do we start from? Yes, we wanted it to be based on their enrollment, but we also didn't want to create a transition in how we budget that had drastic negative impacts on schools. So that school is an example. If I would have said, well, we're gonna look at your projected enrollment for next year and build you a staffing allocation that aligns with that, they could have fallen all the way back to what that board formula said, right? And potentially more if their projection was negative. And so instead what we did is we treated this year as the baseline year. We said every single school is, I'm using my quotey fingers, overstaffed. And that's a good thing. That is a board and superintendent priority. And so we cemented that in how we built our baseline budgets moving forward. And so basically we just made adjustments projection to projection. So their projection for this year and now their projection for next year. So if their projection was down 25 kids from this year to next year, they had to address 25 kids worth of loss in their budget. They didn't have to address 25 kids plus 5 FTE worth all the way back to board formula. So we were able to kind of cement in place that concept of overstaffing in a really beneficial way. And so that's why when I stepped into every single school, if their projection was consistent, I said, you will be able to do exactly what you did this year if you want. You also can turn some of your programming money into more staffing. Or if you have a position that isn't creating value for you, you can turn that into more programming. And we've had schools do all three of those things, okay? And so it's provided really great flexibility. And again, you won't find a school that the move to student-based budgeting has had a drastically negative, big negative impact on that. Because we treated this year as the baseline year, and that was a way to kind of solidify the strategy of the district. Okay. So this is a document that we sent out to principals and school leadership back in early December. And so I've been meeting with principals every single month at their level principal meeting. I've been going and meeting with small groups to prepare them for now I believe we're at school 48 right now. I think I have only 4 or 5 more. I'll talk about that in a sec. But we sent this out in December to kind of start to prepare them for what was coming. And so you'll see a couple of key things there. Vision and strategy, the assurances of a baseline budget. What we've learned, thank you so much, what we've learned in national research of the transition to school or site-based budgeting is if you provide an inconsistent method, schools will automatically lean away from it. They need to know that they can trust on their resource year to year. And so that's the assurances that we built in December and that we've carried forward. We also started to discuss the autonomies or the areas for autonomy and then the areas of consistency. And so a couple of big things came out. And you'll see this when we get into Aliview in a little bit. Schools had significantly more autonomy in where they spent their resource. And the district controlled a large amount of resource as well. And so we'll show you how that FTE kind of broke down in a second. But we controlled a lot of FTE centrally to make sure that we had consistent programming across the district, to make sure that we weren't going to drastically reduce special ed services anywhere, or GT services, or CLDE services. And so we struck a good balance in year one of what does a school have control over and what are we still managing centrally. And then we also started to show them what are average salaries, or average cost of FTE. I will say this is one of the best parts of the transition, is the budget awareness of the cost of personnel. And so this is by position, by level, because remember, our commitment to schools is that we would do this on averages. We didn't want schools making hiring decisions on the cost of an employee because they have more or less experience. We don't want you to say, well, that really experienced teacher is phenomenal, but I really want to save that $25,000, and so instead, I'm going to take a teacher with a different experience level who I'm not as sure is going to deliver results so I can save some money. Everybody's doing that on averages across the system. I would say that's something they've been very grateful for, is that there's no pro or con to having experienced or non-experienced staff. But it really helped them understand the true cost of personnel. Because every time even when we talk as a board, what we never take into consideration is benefits. And benefits is a lot. It's upwards of 33, 34% potentially for employees. And so when you think about that, average cost of a teacher is $70,000, but really it's over $100,000 because of the benefits. And so it's been a great budget awareness tool for our school leaders to start to be like, wow, okay, now I understand what it really costs to run this program and why we need this many kids.
Just to clarify, most of that is our para, because it's the employee contributes 13%, we match 13%, so right there is like 26%, right?
Our cost is 30 some percent. Yeah, so it's not, and then on top of that, obviously, is the employee share as well,
That's a big chunk.
It is a big chunk. And so we did this across levels, across job categories. Now, I will say not every single job that exists in the district did we create an average for. We do have some onesie twosies, and so we did the best to combine those with like jobs to make sure that there was reasonable cost associated with all positions. Okay, and so we sent this out to them. Can I go to my next document now, Melissa?
Yes.
We sent that out to them in December and started to have conversations about the build, okay? Now, the third document we're going to show you is what we sent to schools right before we went to build their staffing allocation, usually the following day. And so as an example, this is North Middle School. And so you'll see there's a few pieces of data on the top. We have what their certified enrollment was this year, what their projected enrollment was this year, their projection for next year, and that projection difference. Because remember, that projection difference is what changes their allocation. North, as an example, has a projection difference of 54 kids. So, theoretically, when North goes to build their budget, they should be able to build exactly what they have now and 54 kids worth of money left to have more staffing, more programming. And my commitment to every single principal, and we always do a sense check at the end, is I promise you at the end of this, it will make sense. The budget will make sense. I will say the budget office's allocation model has been very, very accurate. In a few cases, it's been off a little bit, high or low. And so we adjusted in the meeting, right? If it doesn't make sense, if Stephanie at North is like, Brandon, I built what I still have and I barely have what I left over, okay, our allocation model was off. And so we need to true that up based on what you should have. And so we leave that meeting with the assurance of like, all of this is making sense. Okay, so then we show them what their discretionary dollars are. And so for North, you can see that Stephanie and her team had about $4.6 million of discretionary funding to spend. Now that is on their discretionary staffing as well as their programmatic budget. Below that, you see some of those set-asides that we talked about. Lots of positions we still control centrally. So you'll see there, SPED, CLDE, ELL, GT, counselors, LTEs, TLCs in elementary school, VAPA allocations in elementary school, custodians, health techs, lots of positions we still manage because schools, we don't want them having to do all of that. And so you'll see that when we get into Alleview in a little bit, how that cost breakdown happens. But they have a large amount of resource to play with. As an example, Stephanie at North this year, when she got her budget, had about $120,000 that she could say, okay, here's what I have to run my school, because she had no control over her staff, right? She doesn't get the chance to say, Brandon, I need one less teacher actually, and so can you make that $120,000, $220,000? No. Or Brandon, actually, I need one more teacher. Can you take that $120,000 and make it $20,000 because I need another 8th grade science teacher? No. So now, her and her team have that ability, right? And so additionally on the bottom, we had them start to think about, we will have a fall adjustment process next year. And so after we certify October count, we're gonna go to schools and say, you're above projection, I owe you money. And not the little bit of money that they get right now. They get about $100, about $200 per kid that they are over projection right now in a January true up. I'm talking about like $5,000 or $6,000 a kid because that's gonna be the average cost of the pupil. And so if Stephanie is again next year, what was she this year? 40 kids over her projected enrollment? Stephanie's talking about $200,000 coming to her in late October, early November, not $8,000, right? And so we're having them start to think about, if I'm up, what do I want to spend that money on? Is it more staffing? Is it programmatic? On the flip side, if you're significantly under projection, you owe me a little bit of money. I need to take some of that resource because I got to fund some of that overages. So it is, to Superintendent Gall's point, bringing more accountability to the system. They are now going to be much more accountable to their resource level.
I think the other piece is that you have the emotional culture piece to it as well, where it's been a while, but I've heard when a parent went and volunteered in a school that they overheard a teacher that wasn't happy about something, and it left a bad taste in that parent's mouth to go, teachers here are unhappy, I don't want to come volunteer. So when you know that your dollars are directly tied to your enrollment at your neighborhood school, you want everybody on board on that positive culture shift to say, we've got great staff, we're bringing in volunteers, we're bringing in kids, because kids equal more program money for the fun things that make our school even better.
Yeah, we absolutely, our schools want kids in their doors, and they want to do great things for kids. And right now, there is no real incentive. There is no incentive. If you happen to get that kid and happen to get enough kids, and you hold them until the following year, and it shows up in your projection, maybe my office gives you another teacher.
Right.
But right now, there is no, like, Brandon, I need that now. Like, I'm 25 kids over, we got some stuff we can do right now. Right now, we don't have that ability. And so this is going to build that ability. I will say, this is going to be a challenge for us. And so you'll see when I bring our budget for next year, I'm requesting to set aside some one-time money to help with this. Because here's what I know. I know there is no way I'm going to take the same amount that I owe, right? I know that. And so I want to set aside some money now to make sure that the money that I owe a school, I can give a school. And if we have a school that we need to have a conversation with about softening some of that money that they owe us, we can have that conversation. So you'll see that in this year's budget development. Okay, so this comes to the school the day before. They start to review. Many of our principals have already been in the tool, doing things, moving things, many wait. Then we get to the budget meeting, and these budget meetings are awesome. We sit down at a table like this. We've been in so many spaces. We've been in principal's office, conference rooms, class in one school, and it's a whole team that shows up to support that principal and their leadership team. So its budget is there, HR is there, CLDE is there, GT is there, special education is there, VAPA is there sometimes. Chris Kilroy has showed up to a lot of them. So what you've seen is this team from central office show up and say, let's strategize. And it's been incredible because we'll see Emily Andrews say, hey, your allocation by our model is that you get a 0.4. And I know you have that person, they really want to be a 0.5, and the principal says, yeah, I can kick in a 0.1, right? A 0.1 is about $11,000 right now for a GT teacher. I can get you $11,000 out of my budget or out of my title budget because I know in that extra half a day, that GT teacher now can be a GT coach. And so we're seeing all of this flexibility and flow between the system in a way that we haven't seen before that I think has been really responsive to schools. As an example, I'll use Freedom. You guys have met Dr. Rochelle, the principal there, and she has big ideas. And so she shows up and she says, yeah, I need my gifted resource teacher, and I'm ready to kick in 0.7 because I need that to be a full-time person because they're going to be doing X, Y, blah, 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 blah. And what we say is, yes. And so that autonomy, I think, has been very well received. Okay, I'm going to connect to the screen real quick, and I'm going to get us in AlaView and just kind of show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is the AlaView interface. I'm going to show you Holmes Middle School. I use Tony as the example often. He sat on most of my committees that have been working on site-based budgeting. He's sitting on the current one, as well as a number of community members who are helping us build out a sustainable model moving forward. And so here's kind of what you'll see. You'll see that Tony has kind of 3 buckets over here on the left. Now, Holmes is not a Title I school, so they don't have a Title I allocation. But if they were, they would have an allocation there. You'll see that there's this Holmes discretionary. Now we've already had Tony's meeting. He's already spent most of his money. And I'll show you what that looks like. But you'll also see this special programs position locked. That's all of that FTE that I told you that central office is still managing. Okay? So I show that to say it's still a lot of resource. $1.6 million at Holmes Middle School. And so this is something for us to continue to work on and think about as we move forward, is that the right balance? Is it the right balance right now between centrally managed and school-owned? Or do we need to shift some of that? What I will say, and this is work across the principal group, is they have different opinions of that. Some of them really love central office managing those allocations. They don't have to own it or deal with it. And others of them are saying like, I want it. I want to have more control because I have more creative ideas. So that will be a lot of the continued work. That's what I'm working on with our little SBB subgroup, or parameters and rule sets and all of those things. Okay, so originally Tony had about $3.7 million here. The total overall budget for Holmes of staffing and programming is about $5.3 million. And so what Tony did first is he went into this positions plan and he built his staff. And here's how simple this is. Just to show you, I'll cancel it at the end. You would go in here to add position. I want to add a teacher. And so it's going to bring up options for the average teacher. You'll see this is the average teacher. Let's say he wants to add a 1.0 FTE. And it would say the total cost of that with benefits is $97,000. And so this is what we've done bit by bit. We've built their staffing and they watched that allocation drop. And it's been so amazing for them to kind of sit and be like, wow. After I did my 18 teachers, I saw that $1.6 million went away like that. It's like, yes, that's the cost of running the school. And so Tony's built out all of his staff, and Tony's ahead of the game. So he's also gone to his programmatic budget, which is over here in non-personnel expenses. And just to kind of show you an example, so let's go art resources and supplies. So here's one of the great things about OwlView. It forces the system to identify strategies. And so if we were to go back into strategies, and I apologize, my language is a little outdated, but we will update it. I created these priorities for the district based on the board priorities, right? Achievement, enrollment, and engagement. And so now within that, every single school has created their budget strategies that connect to that overall district priority. So what this allows us to do now is pull data and evaluate, okay, we say as a system that we value best first instruction. How much are our schools actually spending on that in their programmatic budget? How are they defining their specific priorities related to that? So every school has had to go in and do their priorities. And then when they're entering expenses, they say, okay, Tony needs $6,000 for art resources and supplies, and he says that that's connected to his strategy of authentic learning resources. And so he can select a vendor. There's all kinds of things he can do in the tool. But that's now how in control of their budget they are. I can't tell you how many times a school leader has come to me and said, Brandon, I don't even understand what this account string is for. Why is there money in it? Well, it's because the budget office loaded money in it last year, and we loaded it the same way the year before, and the same way the year before, and the same way the year before. If a school calls us and say, hey, I don't want that anymore, can you do it differently? We've done that. But we've never said, no, school, you build your budget. And so now they're in control of their budget. And they're using all of their account strings. It keeps them clean with instruction and non-instruction. But they now own their budget and are allocating their resources against their need. We're not centrally saying, well, Holmes, you're going to get $32,000 in printing because that's what Holmes has had for the last decade. Tony can say, guess what? We're not printing anymore. We're using art supplies. But it just puts them in significantly more control. And so eventually, we will load the money for the special programs, and Tony will end up with a zero budget, right? He will end up with a balanced budget. It will then go through an approval process to include his area superintendent, to include my office, and then Holmes's budget is built for next year. And they're ready to rock and roll. And they have actively created that entire thing all the way from their staffing allocation down to their individual resources for how they fund teachers.
So just to be clear, they build their budget, but then there's two checks after that between the areas we generated.
Yes. Yeah. And so here's what I would say. I as I've talked to districts across the country who have done this work, and maybe I've said this to the board, I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Every single district has said there was always a fear initially of schools going rogue and doing wild things. And they said, you're going to have to force them to get creative because largely what they'll do is build exactly what they have now. And we've seen that largely, and we've seen some creativity. And so I think we're striking the right balance. We will over time build in solid parameters and checkpoints to make sure that a school is never going off in a wild direction. That, you know, they don't get to say, hey, next year we don't have any special ed staff. We're only worried about GT here at this school. So we will always have those parameters and we will build those in. And right now, largely schools are staying pretty consistent with how they allocate resources. That is my presentation. I turn it over for questions.
So under the vendor tab,
Uh-huh.
that's still, schools still benefit from accounts with companies, so
Yes.
they get the discount, the unit
They do,
price.
yeah. The great thing is our vendor list is uploaded here, so if you already know it, you can identify it right then. You don't have to do the added paperwork with procurement to say, hey, yet again, we're using Cole Promo for t-shirts or whatever. They're in the system, you can identify them, and the budget is built.
Gotcha.
How much training do principals get to use something like this?
We've been meeting every single month during their level meeting and kind of going through this. What I will say is, I'm a former teacher, so we did a lot of I do, we do, you do. And so when we sat in their budget build meeting, I modeled it for them. I had them get in and build one staffing allocation, and then I took over so that they can engage in the strategic conversation. We have built, just for the board's awareness, access and resources. We built how-to guides that have click paths and screenshots and all of those things. And I've had a couple of principals reach out afterwards and say, Brandon, I forgot how you did that. And so we jump on a quick WebEx and we do it really quickly. I envision next year this will not be something that I will be at all 54 meetings. I imagine it will be the principal and their team, as well as their area superintendent and a budget or HR representative, because the principals will absolutely know how to do this without any need for support by the time next year comes. I will also, in support of our principals, say you would be really amazed at how many of our leaders showed up having gone to their school community for feedback. They have their presentation prepared for me. It says, here's the rank order of the priorities for my school community. We think this is important, this is important, this is important. And so it makes the job a lot easier because then we know what we're doing, right? We're not figuring it out in the room. I will say one other added benefit that I've really found is it's really focused the rollover conversation. Because now, as they're considering, okay, I got about what I started with this year, could I squeeze another 0.5 teacher in there and do something creative? And then my budget person, Amber, will say, well, you started this year with $280,000, meaning you rolled over $150,000 from the last couple of years. And so you haven't really historically been spending all of your budget. And so that's been a really cool conversation. Is like, hey, do I think about how I run my school in a more focused way programmatically and try to draw down on some of my carryover? Or do I stay the course and do what I'm doing now? But again, that availability for creativity has been cool to see with principals.
And they seem to be pretty on board with this new program.
I have not received any negative feedback about the program. I would say we have a couple of schools that their staffing or that their projected enrollment is down. Some of them were very prepared for that. And some of them were like, how can I squeeze a little bit more out of that? But I haven't had anybody push back on like, oh, my student-based budgeting is now the enemy. And again, we really thoughtfully designed it so that my commitment to them is like, student-based budgeting isn't the reason you have to change anything. It can be the reason you change everything, but you won't have to change anything because of it, right? It's just a program, a methodology. It ultimately gives you more freedom, but assuming you're gonna keep the same number of kids and you wanna do the same thing, you absolutely can. And we've had a number of schools that have done that, and we were done in 15 minutes.
So review for me again about curriculum adoption. That stays with the school or it goes to the district level?
So curriculum adoption is still centrally office managed, and so that is a question that's come up, is the consumable part of that, right? And so our academics office is still committed to providing the level of resources that they are now. Now schools historically have spent part of their budget on increasing that, and so they've had the ability to continue to do that. Right now, we usually have allocated them a certain amount and they would spend it or not spend it and then budget transfer back and forth, right, to an account that they would spend it to. Now they get to distinctly decide, I want this amount for curriculum consumables next year, no more and no less than what they think they need.
And the goal is to balance this budget to zero, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
And so there's gotta be transition work for those who feel having 180,000 still left in their reserves, just in case.
Yeah.
So there's gotta be that transition and that opportunity, and I would think also that for some who have been practicing in that manner for however long, that they'd be scratching around for where's my safety net? What if what
Absolutely.
ifs?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and we actually talked specifically about that, which is, now, I want them being aggressive and going after enrollment, and I understand, they're like, hey, that projection seems a little high, I need to squirrel away money for 10 or 15 kids, and so they have the ability to do that in here, right? They're kind of bucketed in a general supplies account or something like that. That's why in that one pager, they're identifying, if I come in under enrollment, where do I think that money's gonna come from? And so some of them are being wise in I don't wanna say wise, potentially being wise and saying, to play it safe, as I'm not sure about my enrollment yet, I'm gonna set aside a little pot of money. And then if Brandon comes looking for money, I've already identified that will be the pocket or the bucket that the money comes from.
Any other questions?
It's not as big of a shift for the schools because over the last 2 years, we've been introducing them to these concepts. Schools have been applying for the MLO positions that are carried, and they apply by strategy, and then they report out whether or not that worked for their strategy, because it doesn't just auto-renew the next year. And so we've been bringing the school leaders into this space of, tell me what it is you want your school to be about, how do we align the resources for you to get there, and then make the corrections at the end of the year on the one plan of, did it work or did it not work? Does it need another year? Did it need a different person? Does it need different training? Or some other alignment to get there. And so it has been really, it's been a nice, one, it's a great tool. The tool has continues to improve all the time, so hats off to the company for that. But it really starts to now align the building with the USIP, which aligns to the UDIP, which aligns to the superintendent's message, to the board priorities. And so we're now in a place where, remember, every dollar that we don't spend on the first day of school, that we don't have budgeted against a program, is a lost opportunity for a kid. And then we still need to make sure that we don't overcommit ourselves in the beginning of the year. But we're now in a place where we'll be much tighter aligned. The irony is when a school says we're all about early literacy, and then you run your budget and say, you're understaffed in your early literacy strategy. So just the strategy tag alone allows you to, from David Colicky and an Ed Insights perspective, bucket schools and say who's running what priorities and do their budgets align against it. You can't be a school that's all about early literacy that isn't fully staffed in your early literacy.
Just to add on Superintendent Gall's point, that our Title I schools have been very prepared for this. This is exactly what they do all of the time, right? Now, they get to do that in this tool now. They don't have to do a separate thing in a separate plan in a separate way. But they, I think we have 23, 24 title schools. We're almost half. So those principals, they know exactly what to do. And so now it's bringing the rest of the system up to speed. But we have been getting more strategic over the last couple of years. And so I think the good part is schools have been coming, as I identified earlier, with their strategies ready. And so it's not like, oh, I haven't even thought about how we should allocate resources next year. They've come and we've gotten into some banter sometimes and some battles in some really quality ways about how they think they should be resourced. But overall, really positive thing. And before we close, I just do want to express gratitude, to Director Nelson for kind of helping lead this transition to the initiative and kind of setting expectation over time, as well as the board, but also to that team of people that I said have been attending meetings. 54 meetings at an hour and a half apiece is a big time commitment. And that, but I wouldn't change that for the world, because the principals watching that team of people show up who typically sit in this kind of distal place and they own the FTE, and sitting down and saying like, hey, we're here to strategize with you, I think has been worth its weight in gold in helping the process go smoothly. So I just want to make sure and express my gratitude to them.
Dr. Art.
Thank you. I was curious, you mentioned like under enrollment and that they have to have an idea of what they are going to not do. But what if, I guess the what ifs come to mind, if they've hired staff with the dollars?
Yeah, so I don't know that answer yet. What I will say is, and this is a historic, there used to be a fall adjustment for staff process in District 11, right? Now, conceptually, what I really think might happen is there's probably gonna be a vacancy at that school, right? That could be an area. And again, why I said we wanna set aside money, because I know I'm not gonna get everything that I owe. If the decision of the district leadership is like, we gotta leave that school alone, because then I have money to leave that school alone. And so I don't want it to be, it's much more of the carrot, not the stick, right? I know I'm gonna have to have a level of accountability there, but I'm not looking to try and balance my budget off of, you came in 5 kids under enrollment. Like, that's not what it is at all. And that's what this, my subcommittee is helping me identify is, what's that threshold? Every single kid you're over projection, I should give you money. But if your projection is 300, you come in at 299, you owe me $5,000. Like, that seems unreasonable, right? And so what's that threshold?
Is it 7 kids? Is it
Also,
14
yeah,
kids?
but also, like, if I say it's 10%, well, 10% at Doherty High School is 160 kids. Clearly, I can't cover that whole gap. So we're working on that. I will say that we want to make sure that there's accountability there, but we're not trying to jeopardize what a school is doing. I think the board and the superintendent have demonstrated that over the last couple of years, i.e. my first slide, which is the school by board formula would have 50.3 FTE and they have 55 FTE. So we are really well versed in making sure that we are protecting and resourcing schools, and that will continue. This process doesn't change that, and we'll have to strike that right balance.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Director Jurgensen.
Just a comment, so then you can take this a couple steps further by going, okay, we know how we spend money, we know how the school's performing, right? And then they can have those discussions of, based on your, beginning of year, middle of year, end of year testing, your CMAS, whatever it is, that with your allocations, we can start to right size, saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't spend so much here. Have you thought about putting more here based on this deficiency in your math scores or?
Absolutely, and what I will say is, and I'm very excited about this, I was talking to Poudre Valley School District on Monday because they're considering bringing Allevue in. And I don't remember if in the Power School presentation they talked about this, but the beta, the Allevue 2.0, the whole point to the Power School initiative is that data lake.
Right.
What Allevue is going to be able to do is say, okay, Holmes, you spent $10,000 on this reading intervention program. It's gonna be able to pull the data from that program and say, here's the return on investment for that.
Yeah.
Right? It showed this level of impact. And so this is just the start to getting to the, like, how effective are our resources? We will have to do that as a district, but the system is going to make that so much easier as they grow and transition in their ability as we have more access to that data. So yes, that's the whole point to all of this, right? Being more strategic about how we spend it the first time, but then also having the data to say, now we strategically will build it differently the second time, right, if we need to.
That's neat.
Thank you. Appreciate the work that has been put into this and also the time in going to every single school and sharing this with them and laying the foundation for what is to come. So, and this was a good update for the board and the community as well. Do you have any closing thoughts on this? Okay, thank you. Looking at the other agenda on the topic, other Director Jurgensen, with the board at this time.
Yeah, I think more just for awareness or for the radar, I think we've already mentioned just how fast things are coming down from the federal level, what that looks like at the state level. There are things that we probably want to consider moving on that we should chat about. So I don't know if you want that tonight or if you want to hold till the retreat, but I just want to make sure we have all of our ducks in a row if we are counting on federal funding.
Okay, and I can give you feedback or what I know about that situation at this point in time. One other board director contacted me about the same concern about a letter that came out from the federal government a few days back, and it talked about school districts and higher education universities as well has to comply with certain things, and if you're out of compliance, then you could lose federal funding. And there was, I think, a time limit attached with ensuring that that is being implemented. And after I received that information, I forwarded that to legal counsel Deb Jenkins, and she is taking a look at it. And the initial feedback that she suggested was that we may have to look at our policies, a couple of policies, and if we need to revise those policy language or even repeal those policies. So she is fully aware of it. She is right now on medical leave, so I am waiting to hear back from her. As soon as I hear back from her, I will keep the board informed. She also stated in the preliminary email that she sent to me was that letter that was sent does not have the force and effect of law. It does not bind the public or create new legal standards, but that is designed to provide clarity to the public regarding the requirements of various civil rights law. So, but it's still something that we need to keep in radar. If based on legal guidance, if something needs to come to the board within the next 14 days, I will certainly keep the board informed so that we just don't are even threatened with losing any type of federal funding at this time.
I think whether it's legal guidance or just the continued efforts of what we spoke of at our last retreat, which was in the fall, of bringing neutrality to our classrooms and, you know, taking out any sort of political ideologies, there might be still the rationale for us taking action, whether that federal threat is there or not.
I agree with you, and that is a topic of conversation that the board certainly has to engage in and figure out what is it between now and the end of the school year that the board wants to focus on in regards to policy. What I'm talking about is if, based on that letter that came out, if the board is required to act within the next 14 days. That I need legal guidance on. If we need to act in urgency within the next 14 days, or do we have the next couple of months as the board revises and has a chance to look at the policies before the end of the school year?
I mean, policy BG lays out the options for repealing or suspending a policy, and it needs at least 2 readings, so you got at least 2 special meetings there to make any repeals to policy, so.
Okay.
Something we need to start looking at.
Okay. We can, I mean, if you want to elaborate on any of the policies that the board want to look at right now, you go ahead and do it. Or if you want to wait till the board retreat to have that discussion, we can have it at that time. Okay. Would you want to wait till the board retreat? Are you looking around the
That's
boardroom
fine.
at this time?
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay. Okay, great. I mentioned about.
Maybe the 2 of you put it on the agenda for your agenda setting.
It is on the agenda setting, as I mentioned, in the for the March 12th work session. And I understand the frustration that was shared.
If the legal piece needs to have action sooner, then I would assume you put it on the agenda.
Absolutely,
for the
that will come by the March 5th,
Right.
and even before if it is necessary, if something needs to be there. As far as the board retreat on March 12th, is there any specific agenda items other than looking at what the board wants to accomplish between now and the end of the school year? Is there any specific topic that the board wants to talk about at the retreat?
I'd like us to make sure we're honoring our staff's time. You know, that was the thing we mentioned in the first fall retreat was how do we take the onus off of staff to be attending all these different things in the evenings to show up for this or that or to facilitate this and then do the next, you know, do the same presentation to us again at a board work session. I want an update on that and just making sure that we're being mindful of how hard people are working at all levels.
Okay.
So.
Anything else that the board wants to consider at the retreat? I'm assuming between what the board wants specifically to talk about is what are the areas of focus between now and the end of the school year, as far as the board perspective, policies that they want to focus on, other agenda items that they want to focus on. We can send out a survey based on input that has been received to kind of get a higher level That way, if we need somebody to facilitate that conversation, we can have some help and support as well in that board retreat.
We, over this last beginning of the school year, worked towards making our committees work more focused and impactful in moving the district forward. And so I wonder if it would be helpful to get an update on, like we made some changes, like you were the liaison between the DAC and figuring out what presentations make sense for that space versus the board. And so I'm just wondering how that's going, and kind of coming back to Director Jorgensen's point of, are we making sure we're being respectful of staff's time, and and in addition to our own meetings, are we respecting and appreciating the effort it takes into creating presentations, and can we continue to rein that in more?
Yeah, I think Director Jorgensen referred to that already, respecting the staff time, which is the same thing that you are looping into, Director Nelson. And Director Hafley is part of that conversation as well. Any conversation that takes place between the DAC and right now agenda setting with Ms. Otmer, both of us are copied into it, and we've had a couple of meetings, but we will provide an update at that, and Ms. Otmer can talk about, as she is the district contact for those committees, she will be able to provide a better update to the board as to how that is working out over the last several months. Okay. I'm just looking at this, and I will. I think that's all I have at this point in time. There are several. Ms. Olson puts out several calendar invites sometimes to attend these coffee conversations at the early mornings. If you cannot attend, and I know that board directors are sometimes strapped for time at the morning, but just let us know. That way I can ensure that a different board director attends in your place. And if I can know the earlier in point in time, then I can contact the board directors so that that allocation can take place. Okay, with that in seeing there is no other discussion, this meeting is adjourned at 5:05 p.m. Thank you.